friend. My name is Julie, and today we're here with Sargeant Sneed. Sargeant Sneed has been in the law enforcement for 39 years. He has a wealth of knowledge and has a lot to say about mental health. And here's his story. I'd just love to talk to you and hear your story over when you started noticing your own mental health.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a very large family. We were very poor. I think that's the first time I really realized that I was black. And when I say that in a very respectful way. And prior to that, I didn't really realize that there was anybody around because we never left our neighborhood. Everything we did was right there. When I got bused was right when integration was happening. And so I got bused across town, away from my neighborhood. Did not feel welcomed at the time, and that was in the early 70s, and it was pretty tough. Integration was pretty rough, in some places worse than others. But I just didn't feel like I was welcomed at the school that I went to. A lot of what I call my mental health kind of, I think, started at that point with the PTSD from watching violent situations happen, not only in the home but also in the neighborhood. I was fortunate enough that I had a counselor, Mr. Koshin. It's the only person I can tell you in my primary and secondary school years who made a very positive impact on me and got to know me, and we would joke around. But by my 7th grade year, I was pretty well integrated into it, became involved in athletics, and my grades just skyrocketed through. I went from a D student to an A student. When I graduated high school, I had several college offers to play basketball, full scholarships, and I told my mom I was going to be a police officer in our city, and she said, "No, you're not." So eventually got into law enforcement. And one of my first experiences in law enforcement was obviously dealing with situations like family disturbance and domestic violence calls. And some of that is kind of relive that trauma that you went through as a child when dealing with situations that involve others. Became very intrigued with mental health and how that impacts people, but also how it impacted me. Fast forward, I got promoted into a position as a juvenile officer, and the department I was working in, you handled all cases involving child abuse, child sexual abuse, any types of incidents where a child was either the victim or they're the suspect. And so that particular role took me to do investigations, typically at the middle and high school. And I remember going to this middle school, and there was this 11-year-old African-American, this black male that was always in the office. And I remember talking to him and trying to mentor him because I had that flashback of me being that 11-year-old.
11-year-old.
Yeah, 11-year-old in the office. So we kind of bonded, had some good conversations. I eventually left that unit, went into the traffic unit on motorcycles, and so was disconnected, and then I actually went into another role as K-9 officer. So fast forward 8 years from this 11-year-old, I now get a call on a Saturday morning in January for a burglary in progress where they thought they had 2 suspects at least inside of a home, but they weren't coming out. So I got there. I could see someone peeping out of the blinds, but could not ever figure out who it was. And the owner finally got home. We ended up breaching the door, going in and doing a search of the home. I encountered an individual hiding. She told me that I asked if there were any weapons in the home, and she said, "Well, yeah, I have a loaded sawed-off shotgun in the closet, a loaded 9mm in my nightstand, and then a loaded Chief Special revolver in my bathroom." And her father was a former police officer, and so that's when we're going to realize, oh man, I got a really awful job. because I can't leave and leave this person inside. So we had to go in and get them. Well, long story short, I ended up shooting and killing this person. Unbeknownst to me, it was that same 11-year-old that I had mentored 8 years prior. And I really didn't start talking about this until probably a couple of years ago, when I started realizing that my story could help other police officers in realizing how important it is to help each other through these mental health and the things that we see in law enforcement, how impactful it can be on the lives of those individuals. And police officers that lose their life, there are more police officers that take their own lives than there are killed by suspects every year.
I did not know that.
It almost doubles.
Are you serious? I had no idea.
Yeah, so I started realizing that maybe my story could help other officers that may be going through a tough time and didn't have anyone, because following that particular shooting of that young man, you get put on administrative leave, which is a standard operation while the investigation plays out, and you go through grand jury and all that kind of stuff to see whether or not they want to indict you or not for your actions. But during that 3-week process, not one officer called or came by to see how I was doing. And I got into drinking to kind of pass the day and pass the time. And so eventually I was able to be cleared by psychologists and to return to work, because they want to make sure that when you get back to work, you're not going to overreact, but also that you're not going to underreact. So
did they send you to a psychologist for you to get help, or just to make sure that you could handle the job?
To make sure you could handle the job.
So there was nothing after
Absolutely
that
nothing.
to help you
Absolutely
cope
nothing.
with shooting or nothing?
Nothing.
Is that still the case today?
No, actually there are peer support groups now within the police departments. Prior to probably 10, 15 years ago, there was nothing in place for support for those individuals. And this particular profession, there's an expectation that you be, for lack of a better analogy, bulletproof, right? You got to be tough, you got to be solid, for your coworkers to even trust that you can be there and handle these situations. So to show weakness, or that you're having difficulty dealing with something that's traumatic, is not very comforting. Officers, it's much like mental health, or mental illness. Nobody wants to talk about it. And so you're dealing with this internally, which can also lead to, tough things. We've had situations here in Austin area where officers have committed suicide. And so, it's always being respectful of the profession. I've been fortunate enough in the 39 years, nearly 40 years that I've been in this particular profession to have learned a lot of things that I can now share with newer and younger officers on how to survive this particular profession. You deal with death, you deal with life on a daily basis, and there's really not a lot of tools in place to support the things that we go through and the things that we see. And so it's much more conscious for me now to make sure that I'm doing things, at least in our department, and trying to help other departments to put things in place based on what I went through, not only as a child, but also as a young police officer, trying to deal with all the trauma and the tragedies that you see.
Just having to go home and still carry all of that.
Absolutely.
And having no outlet, not with your fellow coworkers, not with the therapist or anybody to really cope with that. And taking that home, I just can't imagine the stress and, just how you can take care of yourself.
Self-care is really important.
Yeah, and so were you even taught self-care?
No.
Okay.
No, whatever you come into, that life experience you come into the world with and come into law enforcement with, those are the only tools you have to deal with it. And so we've made an effort, a part of onboarding is to help officers to understand that, because it does affect your family life, your relationship with your children, if you have children, a relationship with your partner and your family in a whole. You find yourself being isolated from people and things along those lines. So it's really important to bring that out and to talk about it. And that's why I love talking about mental health and mental illness, because there's such a stigma associated with it.
Yeah, and if people within the law enforcement, if they start to, see their mental health maybe take a turn that is worrisome, then I could only imagine that would be hard to talk about it amongst others, because then there's that stigma of you might look weak. You can't handle this job anymore.
Correct.
Instead of saying, you know what, we love you, it's time to go see a doctor, get some medicine, and and take some time, and then come back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly true. I mean, you painted the picture perfectly. You don't want to ever seem weak in the profession, because then you lose trust of your coworkers, and that's not an option in this job. You have to be able to depend on each other, and you want to know that, hey, I'm there. But the reality of it is you can still have those feelings, and you can still be effective in your job and in your profession by getting help. But it's
and probably more effective.
Actually, you will be more effective.
You're dealing with it.
Yeah. And so
you have more space.
Right. And a lot of officers are concerned about, if I say I'm having a hard time dealing with this, how's this going to impact my job? Because if my superiors believe that I'm incapable of doing my job, then I get taken off of the streets and I get isolated. And so there's a lot of fear around it. The same fear that I think an individual who has been diagnosed with a mental illness can say, hey, I've been. So are there officers who are in law enforcement who have been who have mental illness? Yes, absolutely. Are they to a point that they would be comfortable, saying that to their peers? Absolutely not.
Right.
I have never been diagnosed with any mental illness, but I know that I have PTSD. It doesn't take a lot to realize that what I've seen and what I've endured in my life has impacted me. And I've gone through counseling and to deal with, not only my professional life, but my personal life. And it has been the best thing that I've ever done.
I want to thank Sargeant Sneed again for joining us here at Mend, because at Mend we believe that we are changing lives one story at a time.
They say the earth is round, but what about the universe? They say war is good, but what about for the rest of us?